Shalom, Harvey. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Good to see you.
And I'd like to welcome all of our viewers in our Beth Tikva family. We are together for yet another installment of Get to Know Your Fellow Congregant. Today we have someone that everybody knows. So we're not going to get to know him for the first time, but we're going to get to know him a little bit better. Everybody knows Harvey Rosenthal, who has been one of our founding members, member of the board from the inception, and who has a lot of experience in both Jewish organizational life and, as we'll discover, in so many other areas of enterprise, both in the government and otherwise. So welcome, Harvey. How are you?
I'm doing great.
I'm happy to hear that. And I'm happy to know that you've weathered this coronavirus sequestration quite well, and that you don't look any worse for the wear, if you ask me.
So far, I'm doing well. As you know, I've moved into a retirement community where they bring me 3 meals a day and take good care of me. Housekeeper was here this morning to clean the place, so I'm in Fat City, as they say.
Good for you. But life wasn't always that easy and that fat, right? I remember hearing from you some stories about your youth, particularly growing up in Ohio. Can you share with us a little bit about the family's history?
Sure. I had my grandparents on both sides came from Russell, Poland. Actually, they were from the same general area, Grodno, and the state of Gubernia. And in about early 1900s, my one grandfather, I have the shipping manifest. He arrived in the United States in 1906. That was the Rosenthal side. His name actually was not Rosenthal. The family name is actually Kanatopsky, which somehow got changed, as happened to a lot of people, to Rosenthal. It may have been the guy in front of him, or it may have been a friend of the guy that was writing it down. Who knows?
Just so you know, I've heard a lot of stories of people who had to use passports that belong to somebody else. Like they purchased those passports to be able to avoid conscription or something like that. So it's just a possibility. Who knows?
Who knows? In any case, the name is Rosenthal. It has been since 1906. So, and that's not going to change. Although we do have, I've met and have known relatives with the name Kanatopsky. One in particular lives in his whole family is in Australia, which is another interesting story, because when this particular grandfather, when they left Europe, they were all running out the back door as the Russian army was coming in the front door for conscription. So they took off and they were gone. Well, they all wound up somehow in Cyprus. There were 3 brothers. One wound up in Israel, one wound up in Australia, and one wound up in the United States. My grandfather. I've met the Australian relatives, and I know that I have some very distant cousins in Israel. The one guy in particular is the chairman of this is good, the pig raising board in Israel. This was many years ago. I don't even know if he's still alive, but it was all export and for the Christians. But that side of the family, Grodno Gubernia, and the other side of the family, and they were all, he was a blacksmith, my grandfather. And my grandfather on the other side, my mother's father, was also a blacksmith. Their name was Post, not Postovelsky or Postolevsky or whatever. It was Post. And my grandmother's name, before they were married, was Bank, B-A-N-K. Again, it seems strange, but that's what it shows up on her birth certificate. So it's Bank, Jenny Bank. And I have met people here in the United States that think we're related, who also have relatives named Bank. But they all got here in the early 1900s and had families raise their children. Did well. My parents were born in the 1900s, in 1915, 16, 17, around and through there. And they all, my mother and father were both born in, my father was born in Rochester, New York, and my mother was born in, if I'm not mistaken, Buffalo, New York. And they emigrated somehow. They all wound up in Cleveland, which is where I grew up.
Well, I heard your father was in the trucking industry.
He was during the Depression, he and another guy started a trucking company, and they never made it because the Depression hit and they lost whatever they had. So my dad went to work driving a truck for a big company, and he spent his life driving a truck and working for these big companies, big trucking companies. And he was on the road for a while, but my mother didn't like that, so he gave that up and became just a local driver. But they they did well. They took care of us, and we all grew up. I went to Glenville High School in Cleveland, which is at the time was about it was very mixed, half white, half black. In fact, the president of my class was a black young guy, lovely man. He became a dentist, lovely guy. And there were a bunch of different ethnic groups. For the most part, they were Jews. And we grew up with a Jewish background, just like a lot of everybody, most people we know. And what I didn't learn at home, I learned in Cheder, where I started as a young boy and continued for a long time. It kept me from getting into more trouble than I always got into anyways. But I went through high school, graduated high school, and enrolled at Ohio State University, and decided that I'm not ready for Ohio State University, and they weren't ready for me. So I joined the Army, which at the time seemed like the right thing to do. And I went off to the Army in December 1953 and proceeded to get through a few years of trouble. I was not a good soldier, never did take to that kind of life. I managed to get in trouble a lot. If you understand, well, you do. You were an officer. I made PFC 5 times. Which tells you that I just couldn't deal with the structure and with the discipline. But I managed to get through it and come out alive.
Sure.
And after college is when the Army did nothing more than help me grow up a little bit. At which time I enrolled at the Kent State University, which was just south of Cleveland. In fact, I became a commuter student. I drove to class about 30 miles each way every day, get carpools going, and I graduated from Kent State University with a major in transportation and traffic management. Very kind of an esoteric area, but I enjoyed it. I liked it. Did pretty well. And when I got out of the Army, or we got out of school, things in the economy were not so hot. There were very few jobs and far between. And I had 2 interviews for jobs, one with a company called McLean Trucking Company, which it was and still is a very big operation. It was located in South Carolina. And in those days, young Jew boys like me did not want to go to South Carolina. It was not a very happy place. The other one was a company called Roadway Express, which still exists. It's also a very large company.
Yeah.
And their offer was a training program of a year, 52 weeks, 50 weeks of which were working on the docks. which meant that they were just looking for cheap labor. And I was just not at all pleased with that sort of thing. And I happened to see not an ad, but some kind of an announcement about a job in the government. And I applied for it. And lo and behold, somebody called me and said, we understand you're interested in working for the government, on and on. And I said, yes. And I was interviewed, and they were very happy to talk to me. And I wound up going to work for the Transportation Division of the United States General Accounting Office in Washington, D.C. And this was not it was not a great job. I can remember I started as a GS5, which that's pretty good, considering that the GS1 is very, very low grade clerical type stuff. GS5 got a college degree. Man, I'm big time. Well, the salary was $4,345 a year. I remember that very clearly.
Unbelievable.
Which is pretty tough to support a family, a wife and two small babies. But we managed. We moved to Washington, and Judy and I, and we had gotten married a couple of about 3 years before that. I was still in college when we married. And that's another story. She was the rock that didn't really control me, but tamed me and caused me to become a better student in school and to knuckle down and get things done right. And that was a major step forward for me. So we moved to Washington, and I went to work for the General Accounting Office. It was not a happy place. This was a pretty much a clerical job, auditing freight bills and things of that nature. And it was just not very interesting. But I'm the type of person that you give me a job to do, and I'm going to do the job. It's going to get done. And in that year's time that I spent there, I managed to get a reputation as knowing what I was doing and doing well. And I get a call from somebody that was, and it turned out later, that I found out later, that this place was a training ground really for the Defense Department. A lot of people went over to DOD from this particular job. And I got a call from somebody in the DOD that they were interested in hiring me. They had heard about me, again, a reputation I didn't know I had. So I went to work for the Defense Department, and that was the beginning of a very, very long-term and happy relationship, because I moved up through the ranks very quickly. I wound up in the senior executive service after many years, but had a wonderful job. I was, again, not the smartest guy around, but I was always able to get the job done, and that's what they needed. I've had a couple of incidents where I caused an international incident once when we were moving. By the time before I retired, I was moving 1 million people a year all over the United States.
Well, for people who don't know this, I tell people that if something moved on water, air, or on wheels,
I was involved.
That's right.
I had a $4 billion budget, and but we had a situation where we had an airplane load of people at McGuire Air Force Base, military and dependents, their families, and another airplane load of people at Charleston Air Force Base of military people and their families. And we also had their passports, but the passports for Charleston were in New Jersey, and the passports for New Jersey were in Charleston.
Oh my God.
The planes were leaving at approximately the same time, and they were arriving in Europe at the same time, in Germany, Frankfurt, Germany. So I said, put them on a plane. When they get over there, they'll exchange the bags of passports and hand them out. And passports was not an issue for the members, service members. It was for their dependents. Particularly, there were a lot of foreign wives and foreign-born children and things of that nature. So it was very touchy sometimes, and they did have to have their passports. Well, the personnel people uh, gave them to us, to the transportation people, to handle for them, and which was a big mistake as far as I was concerned, which we straightened out later. But anyways, we send these people to Germany, and they arrive in Germany, and the German customs people went absolutely berserk. It took about an hour to get the bags of passports straightened around and get them handed out to the people that needed them, and it got done. But had I not done that, all of those people, and this was about over 300 people altogether, they would have had to be kept in New Jersey and Charleston, found places to stay, because they had all these screaming kids and dirty diapers, and it would have been a real mess for everybody, and terribly inconvenient for those people. Well, I made the decision, and I stuck with it, and I got it done, and I was backed up by my people in the Defense Department. So, customs they went away.
You have a logistical mind.
I tried to.
You've told me stories about, God forbid, also tragic stories about planes that came down and retrieving bodies, etc.
Oh, yeah. That was at Gander, Newfoundland, in 1982, the Gander air crash. That to this day has not been totally resolved to everybody's satisfaction, but at the same time, it happened. There were 188 souls killed, and I was sent from. This was in the middle of December, and it was a snowstorm, a blizzard, and I was told by my general to get in your car and go to Dover Air Force Base right now, which I did. I drove up there in a blizzard. It was a long way around because too late you couldn't get the ferry to go across the bay. So I drove up to Dover, wound up staying in a BOQ and at the mortuary it was McGuire Air Force Base, and it was a terrible scene. I mean, the worst part of it was the military part of it was fine. But there were so many charlatans and fraudulent claims, people banging on the doors of the mortuary all day and all night saying, I want my insurance. Well, some poor woman who's, and this is the key here, her ex-husband, her former husband, was an Army captain, and he was killed on the flight, and she wants his insurance. Well, that wasn't about to happen. And the worst ones were the Bible salesman that came pounding on the door and said, I sold Private Smedlap a Bible for $94.86, and I want my money.
Hmm. Yeah.
So it reached a point where we had to get a hold of the commander of the mortuary, the base commander, and he put a concertina barbed wire fence all the way around the place with a gate. Did it overnight. He was he understood. He knew what was going on, and he did a great job and put that thing up there. Nobody could get into that area without a pass, or unless we knew him. It was a very tough scene.
Yeah, for those of you folks out there who have ever booked your own tickets online, you may recall a system called Sabre, S-A-A-B-R-E. American Airlines was a pioneer.
American Airlines, right.
But the person who was really responsible for deploying that system is in your screens right now. Tell us a little bit about that, Harvey.
Yeah, this was a very interesting thing that was going on. There was a company called SATO, Scheduled Airline Traffic Office, which was a conglomerate of airline employees. All the airlines got together and set up this organization to handle military travel. Well, it was they had absolute control over who moved how to get tickets and all this. And shortly after I got into that business, I couldn't figure out why were we paying this much money for airline tickets, and come to find out these people were doing all the booking and handling all of our travel. And not that they were overcharging us, but they would not allow us to get discounts. They would not take care of, they were just using it for their own advantage. The airline shared that money. They split it up among themselves. So I had another guy and I went to work on it. And we actually had to go to Congress to change the law. The law at the time, which was put into effect in the 1880s, even before that, by the government to protect the government against what they call the robber barons, the railroad people and their agents. Well, it was a ban on the use of agents for transportation by the government. Well, this law was clearly out of sync, and it was we had gone well past that. So we lobbied, and we got the law changed, and then we went to the airlines and said, we want you to rent us these airline systems, which we had helped them develop, actually. And they said no. So, so we said, okay, and we went and battled with them through the Air Transport Association, and we set up a system of testing using travel agents to do our booking other than this company, this Sato. And in the one place we went to first was the Army at the Tank and Automotive Command, which was largely a civilian organization in Michigan. That was a multi-billion-dollar contractor for the government, building tanks and trucks and things of that nature. And we got their permission. We put a travel agent in there. And this travel agent, with one of these little CRT sets, replaced something like 15 or 18 full-time employees in 6 months. And the savings were enormous. And this TACOM said to us, you are not getting these people back. We want, and it was just one person. So we made that a permanent thing, and then we used that to show everybody else how well it was working. And before you know it, we were contracting for travel agencies all over the United States. And Sato had to become a contractor just like everybody else. And eventually they were bought out.
Right.
By a major travel company.
Well, obviously things went well. I see behind you some of your decorations.
That's the I Love Me corner.
That's right. They are similar in, to what people in uniform get, but you got them obviously as a civilian employee.
Civilian. Right.
I know you also went to MIT for a year as part of your training.
This was an interesting thing. There was a program where the government, DOD, and other agencies worked with universities all over the country, and they took a few people every year and set up these groups, these classes. And I went to MIT. I was selected for the program, and I went to MIT for a year, an academic year, and did very well. Wound up, in fact, teaching one of the courses I was taking.
How come that doesn't surprise me?
Well, I just couldn't sit there and listen to what this professor was talking. He was an academician, and he didn't have no concept of the real world. And it was just, and I kept interrupting. He said, well, why don't you get up here and do this? So I did. And, we got along very well. And it was all these young kids. I was already over 40 years old. And all these youngsters, their eyes were popping because I'm telling them things that happen in the real world and what you have to do to get by and how you succeed in doing the things that we were talking about in this class. The class was called Airline Management. And he was trying to teach the class with mathematical formulas. MIT, it's an engineering school.
Correct.
So, and all of these young kids had this was graduate school, and all these kids had just finished undergraduate school. And here I'm over 40 years old. I haven't had a math course almost since high school. And I'm trying to compete with these kids in this course. That's why I was running my mouth. And I wound up as part of the course. And I mean, the final exam was a problem to solve. And I go, look, I can't do that. He says, well, write me a paper. So I wrote him a paper. And I wrote him a wonderful paper. He gave me an A plus, and I graduated with an A in that class. It was a wonderful experience.
Right.
But this is the difference between academia and the real world. I mean, they teach you a lot of basics and fundamentals and things like that. But how do things actually apply? And I'm a worker, not a thinker. I do think a little bit, but I try to analyze things, but from a different perspective. I want
Well,
to get the
obviously,
job
I
done.
can relate to that as well. Rabbinical school taught me how to find the tools,
Yeah,
get things done, but you learn to be a rabbi, you learn to be a professional on the
sure.
march. In the army, they used to call it OJT, on the job
On the
training.
job training.
Yeah. Now, how did you apply all those skills when you were not working at the Pentagon for on behalf of your more spiritual side?
Well, that's another thing. My kids were growing up and they needed education, and we joined a thing. And I wound up being president of several different synagogues as over the years as we moved and as things changed and mergers and things of that nature. And I had a fairly decent education on the basics in Cheder, and I had a fair idea of what I was doing. But then after my parents, my mother and father died within 30 days of one another, and I was going to Minyan on a daily basis, and I understood what was going on and I knew what they were doing, but I had never been much as far as participating in services. But during that time period, just watching and listening, things came back to me, and I get there for an evening minyan one day, and the people that usually do the davening didn't show up, and everybody starts looking at me. so I had to stand up there and daven, and it was an interesting experience. I knew what to do and how to do it, and I flunked through it and got it down, and eventually became one of the mainstays of the morning and evening minyans. And just kept it up. I stayed with it, and as I said, this was a large synagogue. It was Temple Israel at the time, and I became president of that place. We had 800 families, large institution. But the neighborhood we lived in was changing. Not that the neighbors were bad, but they weren't Jews. So we sold the building and moved out to the Rockville area to a different synagogue. I became active in that one too, and then when I moved to Florida here, I ran into Arlene and David Sivikoff, and they dragged me to the Minyan in the hotel because I had started at Temple Shalom. I was not very happy there, didn't like it at all, and I got the word about this place that was meeting on Saturday mornings in a hotel. I met Phil and Ruth. Jason and the Sivikoffs and several other people. And that was the beginning of a long and wonderful friendship with those people. And they were so warm and welcoming, I couldn't stay away. I eventually wound up as a player in that too. I just couldn't keep my hands off. And I've just become, once I start something, I become active in it. I don't give up. I just keep going.
Well, for those who don't know it, Harvey has served on the board ever since. He has been our treasurer. He has been chairman of the Ritual Affairs Committee. He has been our fixer-upper, cleaner-upper, mover-arounder, and whatever needs to be done, Harvey is the guy. Harvey is the person who has taught me how to assemble the sukkah. And there's a lot of things that Harvey does behind closed doors that people don't know. Every week he came and set up the scrolls of the Torah to make sure they were on the right place so we wouldn't have to fumble with them during services. Harvey has maintained our Yizkor lights. and countless other things that need to be done. And I thought that even though people really know you, Harvey, this would have been a good opportunity to recognize all that effort. We had a chance to do so a couple of years ago for your bar mitzvah. And I
Yeah,
know that
that
in
was
October, you're going to turn 85. You should only live
right.
to be 120. Uh,
Amen.
100 like 20, correct?
Right.
And I thought that it was nice. Sometimes we want to know people we're not familiar with, but we also need to know people we think we know very well. And you're certainly one of those people. And I thank you for taking the time. What would you give us as a food for thought for the summer leading up to the high holiday season coming up?
Well, it's going to be it's a difficult year because of the virus and now we're involved in the middle of a major spike in cases. Whether or not we open for the holidays is problematic. I frankly doubt that we will open, and if we do, it'll be under very limited circumstances with very limited number of people in the building. Fortunately for us, this is not the high holidays has not been a major fundraising issue for us because we're mostly snowbird kind of a organization.
Right.
We did service a lot of non-members, and we were very happy to have them. But I just don't see how that happening this year. But the main takeaway from this is we can't control this. You can't control it. Go with the flow. Just adapt and adjust, and do what you can, and participate with us in whatever way we are able to come up with some sort of a spiritual service that we can all participate in from home and enjoy it as much as we can. But don't worry because you can't control these things. There's nothing you can do. You control what you can and you just move on. Life is like that.
Right. I don't know how many people are aware of the fact that for most of us, this marks week 15 with the coronavirus, but for you, it's 2 or 3 weeks more. Before
Right.
this whole thing started, you traveled to see the kids in North Carolina, and when
Right.
you came back, you didn't feel all that great. So
Lockdown.
it has been sequestered for 2 to 3 weeks more than most people have. And I have to commend you for your resilience, for your spirit to keep going despite all of the problems. It's a weird time. All we're asked to do is nothing,
Right.
and sometimes it's not an easy thing to do.
No.
But I commend you for your spirit and your commitment to just move on. And I emulate that. People know that you and I are compadres, right?
Absolutely.
And I miss having lunch or breakfast with you after midnight. But hopefully the time will come when we can do that again. In the interim, Harvey, I wish you a Shabbat Shalom, a happy
Thank you. You too.
year for everybody. And I hope that God will give you the strength to continue helping us push and plow forward in everything that comes our way.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom to you and to everybody out there that's watching this. And just stay strong.
You too. Thank you, Harvey.